before Columbus and up to Columbus's time and well after Columbus's time, pilots really sailed by a technique called dead reckoning. So basically that required a fix, so a point of departure that you knew the location of, and you basically pointed your compass to the place where you wanted to go to, and you just kept track of the distance on a map. And that generally worked, but for smaller bodies of water, like the Mediterranean. But when people started venturing into much larger bodies of water, like the Atlantic and even more so the Pacific, this would not work. So they developed a technique to first of all determine latitude, that is north-south distance.
First developed by the ancient Greeks, the astrolabe helped mariners to roughly determine their latitude.
Longitude, which are those lines that cross each other, latitude, longitude, really did not come into existence until the 18th century. Longitude depends upon accurate timekeeping, and there wasn't an accurate timepiece developed that could be used on the ocean until the 19th century.
There were at times some of the foremost pilots in the world were able to use magnetic declination in order to try to approximate east-west distance. So these were the technologies that enabled Europeans to travel over these enormous bodies of water.
As the weeks dripped by, tedium evolved into tension. Columbus's crew grappling with a shortfall in provisions and a mounting suspicion that their intrepid leader might not actually be leading them to dry land. Narrowly avoiding a fatal mutiny, Columbus convinced his sailors to press on, with a glimmer of hope offered by a sighting of birds flying overhead. Could this glimpse of life mean that the shores of an unexplored land were, finally, within reach? Suddenly, Columbus spotted something. A dot on the horizon. After all this time, could it really be land? His perseverance had prevailed. Not that he knew it yet, but Christopher Columbus had just become one of the first non-indigenous people ever to lay eyes on the Caribbean islands of the Antilles, and, crucially, the North American continent.
The Caribbean is a variety of islands, large, some small. They're populated by small to large communities. Today we think of them all being sort of connected to a linguistic and ethno-linguistic group we think about as the Taino. They all have tribute systems in which commoners paid tribute to nobles. Nobles were known as caciques.
Taínos worship semias, which are features of the land. They could be certain kind of sculptures. So they had a kind of deep association with the land around them. They were agriculturalists. They also practiced hunting and fishing and long-distance trading.
Unfortunately, however, as historians, we actually don't know all that much about them through historical records. They do not practice writing, at least in the systems that we recognize today. That being said, they are connected to each other through trade and stories. There are also some things like marriage and family relationships, just as alliances and weird other things.
We'll never know the exact spot on which Columbus made landfall. Some believe he dropped anchor in San Salvador, where contact was first made with the indigenous Taino populations.
Columbus and his men would have been ecstatic to see the beaches of the Antilles. Obviously, they had been on the voyage longer than they hoped. They were running a lot of food. They were quasi-mutiny to go back to Spain. To imagine that the excitement of reaching what certainly in that moment they thought was the Far East would have been so great. To see the Taino communities, I think there would have been a great hope
expectation that all of the risk, all of the tribulations that they'd experienced on the voyage over would soon be realized in the wealth of Asia. We have some pretty good accounts for the first encounters between Columbus and the Taino. He writes about it in his journal. We also have accounts from other chroniclers who had talked to the original members of Columbus's crew, as well as those that come on later voyages. Not surprisingly, the overwhelming sort of initial sentiment is curiosity. Obviously, Columbus, when they sight land, is hoping that he is beginning to see places and people that he would assume would be in the east.
The Taínos were a very peaceful people, and he saw them as sort of these naive children. In fact, he often kind of talked to them about hijos de Dios, or children of God, because they were so innocent. And he observed in his letters and his conversations that these people were not only docile and subservient, but they would be easy to conquer. They would be easy to enslave, and they would be easy to have their labor exploited for the great glory of Spain. One thing that these native people had developed were these dugout canoes that really kind of astounded Columbus and the Europeans, because some of them carried 30 to 40 people. Some of them were large enough to carry as many as 150 people. And these canoes traveled very fast and very efficiently, and so there was a great deal of interaction among the native people in the Caribbean. These people did not live isolated lives. And so when Columbus came upon them, yes, they were kind of awed by these strange-looking individuals, but they were not completely inexperienced in terms of coming across people from different backgrounds.
The biggest difference was at the level of technology, and that Europeans, Iberians, had technology which was far beyond what was available in the Caribbean. Although the Taino had canoes and other craft that could cross between the islands, they were nothing like the caravels that the Spaniards were coming on. And certain technologies like steel smithing, firearms, these things greatly differentiated the Taino from the Europeans.
Columbus was delighted to set foot on what he believed, and likely prayed, was one of the tiny islands dotted along Asia's periphery. He had made it, fulfilling his contract with the Queen. Now, he needed to figure out what treasures lay in wait. This discovery only added to the explorer's swollen sense of confidence. Soon, an emboldened Columbus went in search of the bustling metropolis of Cipangu, the island we now call Japan, and the fabled Chinese port town of Saigon. He instead washed up in Cuba on October 28th, before pushing southeast in his fretful search for luxurious eastern goods to ship home. December 5th, a floundering Columbus runs the Santa Maria aground, stumbling upon what will prove to be his most important discovery.
Hispaniola was called Haiti, actually. Haiti. He was actually, that's the original name of the island, Haiti. It is in Hispaniola where they're going to actually try to kind of explore a little more fully, when they actually get in touch with a chief in the north of the island, and they're going to establish kind of a relationship. It's never clear to what extent Columbus is able to communicate with any of the natives that he encounters.
Initially, the encounters that Columbus has with the Taino, there are attempts to try and make one side understood through hand gestures and other sort of pantomime. What ends up happening is Columbus does know that he needs translators, and one of the things that he does is that he does steal Taino to try and use them as translators. And there are other moments racializing the voyage. We know that when Columbus arrived on the shores of the Antilles, he chose to call the people there Indios because he had believed that he had made it to the Indies, which in their mind encompassed everything from India to China. And as a result, then, the inhabitants for the Spanish became Indios, generally. Very quickly, Columbus and the Spaniards that followed began to recognize that there were many nations of Indians, naciones de Indios, or gentes, peoples. And so while the term Indio stuck as the sort of general racialized term for all of Native Americans, they did recognize that there were distinctions between different nations of